I thank you for being here so early in the morning. To understand what I bring to this conversation, it may be helpful to know that I lived in a CCRC in Central Florida for 7 years. And then after my husband died, my much older husband, I took a sabbatical from CCRC living, but I remained active through my membership in the National Life membership in the National Continuing Care Residents Association. And some of you may recognize my name because I edit our bi-monthly newsletter. Here's how our story began. My husband and I were invited by friends to visit them and consider living at the estates of Carpenters in Lakeland, Florida. It was a very appealing opportunity for us because we had 2 mountain homes to go to in the summer, and wintering in Florida was very attractive. And I grew up in Buffalo. I thought everybody went to Florida when they retired. It was an ideal location for my husband. He'd gone to high school in Florida. He'd been ordained into the United Methodist Ministry in Florida and had his first 2 churches there. The entrance fee was quite reasonable, and after making a visit, we found that we were very fortunate to find a first-floor apartment close to the dining room, close to the mailboxes, and best of all, close to the nurse's station. So thus it was in 2001 that my 84-year-old husband and I, at age 69, moved into the estates at Carpenters to find myself one of the youngest residents there. There's much to like about CCRC living in Florida. There's strong oversight by the Department of Insurance. There's a very active and strong state residents association, and many of the communities have very active resident associations. Carpenters had an independent residents association with its own revenue stream. We had monthly council meetings. Over breakfast, we would meet for an hour and then invite our CFO and our CEO to come in and meet with us. And we would have, by that time, ironed out any issues that we would discuss. We wanted to know what we would be discussing with them. We appreciated regular financial reporting to the community by our CFO. And 2 residents sat on the board of directors, though it remains a source of frustration that they do not have a vote. The geographical location was appealing to us as well. We were close to 2 very good airports, Tampa and Orlando. MacDill Air Force Base was only an hour away, and our monthly Friday morning meeting visits coincided with parachute jumping practice. For me, being in a college town was important because my career was in higher education, and Florida Southern College offered us many cultural and intellectual opportunities, and we were very near a medical clinic where all our doctors were. After my husband's death, I waited the recommended 1 year before returning to the lovely mountain home that I had built in 1998 on the campus of the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee. And I had never lived in it full-time since I had remarried then. My preliminary plan was to take a 5-year or more sabbatical from CCRC living. You can imagine my surprise when I received a high-dollar cash offer for my house, which was not even on the market. It wasn't up for sale. And I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't expect a real estate miracle like that to happen again. So I sold the house, and I very quickly made visits to 3 final choices on my list. I looked at Alexian Village in Chattanooga. I looked at Richland Place in Nashville, and I looked at Deerfield Episcopal Retirement Community in Asheville. I had a list of criteria that were very important to me because in my work with the National Continuing Care Residents Association, I had already visited over 30 CCRCs. And it might be interesting to you to know what was on my list of criteria, because it's not unlike that of many of the newer residents and the younger folks that we're seeing move into our community. Here's what was on my list. First, in primary, I wanted a strong financial disclosure statement, and that's a requirement in North Carolina. Ours is available on our website, and anybody that wants to see it or have a copy is welcome to see it. North Carolina has strong state legislation and oversight by the Department of Insurance, and that was on my list. I wanted a Type A contract. Unlike some other people, I had a special need and interest in the Type A contract because I'm adopted and I have no medical history, and I thought that was the safest and wisest choice for me. From my experience in Carpenters, I knew that I valued connectivity. I wanted to be able to go from my building to the next building, to the pool, to the exercise room, without ever going outside. I think that was probably a reflection of my growing up in Buffalo. And as I had mentioned earlier, I wanted a college town. We have not only UNCA Asheville, where I live now, but several private colleges. I wanted residents as voting members on the board. I wanted an outstanding healthcare facility. I certainly wanted accreditation if I could find that. I wanted management accessibility. I wanted an open door policy. And I wanted an effective residents association. So with these criteria in mind, I chose Deerfield, a 57-year-old single-site contract Type A CCRC in Asheville, North Carolina, and I moved there 2.5 years ago. Deerfield had just completed a major expansion of its healthcare facility and built a new 5-story, 83-unit apartment building called Tooten Hall. My Tooten neighbors represent a microcosm of the wave of future residents. Some of them had to wait until they turned 62 to even move in. Many of them had done significant research, including visits, as I had, to over 30 CCRCs in several states. These folks are savvy, retired professionals. We've got doctors, lawyers, priests, college presidents, finance experts, artists. We have a big artist community. And believe it or not, many are very technically sophisticated. They were widely traveled, had extensive talents and interests, and they wanted to do more than the existing activities which were already provided, and organize they did. And within a year, all the new residents on our residence council were Tootenites, people from my building. With all their experience in visiting CCRCs, they had lots of ideas about best practices and best features. As you can imagine, their impact on dining services was felt pretty early on. This younger crowd had more vegetarians, strong feelings about local food, and they wanted more dining options. And as you can imagine, the pressures rose on the dress code as well. So from my experience, what do I think CCRC providers can learn from residents? In my opinion, managers who can adapt to the preferences of these newer residents, similar to my neighbors, likely will be in the best position to attract the coming wave of baby boomers. Increasingly, I believe our dining venues will need to be more varied, more options. I think they may need to look more like some of these college dining halls with all these stations you can go to, and you can get such a variety of things. We find also, interestingly enough, that fine dining is still a very popular option in our place. People like once in a while to get dressed up and be served well and just have a night out without having to hit the road. And it's one of the areas in which a feature is still appealing to the long-term residents as well as the newer folks. every time I go in there, I see quite a mix of people, some of whom are even on walkers, and yet my tutor friends are there as well. Like folks everywhere, our people like to be called by name. And one of the hallmarks of Deerfield is a very strong training program on name recognition for all the dining room staff. And some of our more skilled servers have actually learned to remember what our beverage preference is. And you can believe that that really pays off for them when we are approaching the season of our Employee Appreciation Fund drive, which is going on right now. We also have a very popular feature at Deerfield, which is a bar. And the cocktail hour is a popular time for mixing and mingling, and again, where the newer residents and the older residents still have a nice social interchange. As you can imagine, many of these residents, these new folks, are very savvy about the difference between the two kinds of contracts, and financial transparency has been very important to them. Our residents appreciate the fact that actuaries are used every year when we are looking at what the fee increase will be for the next year. That is always a matter of interest and concern. In our case, it's been 2.5% for the last 2 years, and for next year it will be 3%. Our residents appreciate the fact that we get a very extensive presentation about our finances by our CFO, and we are kept apprised of our Fitch bond rating as well. And an important part of our Residents Council is our Resident Finance Committee. Residents serving on the boards of directors is also an increasing matter of interest and importance to the new wave of residents. At the present time, 2 of the 15 voting board members at Deerfield are residents. And our residents are full participants and serve on committees and are just as active as anybody else. In our next issue of the NACA Lifeline, which I edited, I have an interesting comment from a man named Roy Engler, who is a 7-year resident board member at the Ingleside communities. And this is what he has written about his service on board. It worked well for all concerned. The residents brought insight, information, and initiative to the board that would otherwise not have been available. The outside directors were better informed, and they were pleased. The residents of the communities were happy to have representation on the boards. End of quote. While there remains concern that residents may have a certain bias, particularly related to the setting of fees and fee increases, we find that our residents want enough financial security, and they want the fees to be adequate. I have actually heard residents ask, is that fee increase really enough? And so I think the concern about that bias is probably overplayed. Today's residents are pretty savvy about how things work, too. They have figured out that it's pretty hard to enforce rules. They do not respond well to the thou shalt nots. They respond much more favorably when asked to cooperate and given the reasons why. They want a happy home just like everybody else. Managers of the future, I believe, will be most successful if they develop especially good written and oral communication skills. The best way to find out what residents want is to ask them, and to do so in a variety of forums, and to work with all staff members to be good listeners. At Deerfield, I meet regularly with my CEO, and I can tell you that we have some really pretty frank discussions. And sometimes I change hats. I may be speaking to him as president of the Residents Council, or, on the other hand, we may be having a very confidential conversation as board member and the CEO. We also have monthly meetings with our CEO has monthly meetings with our residents. And they're informed of a variety of things. They may be about risk management, they may be about scams, they may be about safety issues. There's an annual health review, but there's always an opportunity for questions. And believe me, the residents don't hold back at all on the questions, and they know that they're going to get a good and fair answer. We also have something that I think is a very positive factor in our community, and I certainly recommend it to you. Annually, we have a retreat of our board and our council members, our resident council members. Last year, Steve Mogg from Leading Age was our presenter, and this coming next month, we're going to have Tom Aiken from Leading Age, North Carolina, lead that retreat for us. We're also very fortunate that at least 4 of our board members have family members currently living in some phase of our facility. One of my council members has a daughter on the board of directors. And of course there's some in skilled nursing and so on as well. One of the avenues of resident and management interchange happens on the weekends. A senior staff member is assigned duty on weekends. Every weekend somebody is there on duty. And they eat with us in our dining room. And so we have frequent interchanges. And they find, just as I do as council president, if somebody isn't stopping you in the hall to ask a question or discuss an issue or so on, they're not doing their job just as I feel. My council members are not doing their job under the same circumstances. We believe in promoting active listening. We have a communications committee on our resident council, and we work together for what we all want, and that's a happy home. We believe that we should try to make every effort we can to work cooperatively with management. In our most recent meeting of the President's Coalition, which I refer to fondly as my kitchen cabinet because they're the Deerfield Resident Association presidents, I asked them what I should tell the folks in Denver when I go there. And the answer was spontaneous and quick and absolutely total agreement, unequivocal. Communication, communication, communication. So in closing, let me tell you something I believe. I believe that effective listening helps build relationships, solve problems, ensure understanding, resolve conflicts, and improve accuracy. In the workplace, effective listening means fewer errors and less wasted time. At home, it develops resourceful and self-reliant kids who can solve their own problems. Listening builds friendships and careers. It saves money and marriages. I certainly believe that effective listening is one of the hallmarks of a CCRC with prospects for a bright future. Thank you.